Hi guys, welcome to next week. This week we're talking about some of the more common diet techniques, ones that you've likely heard some about. Maybe you know quite a bit about them as you potentially have experimented with them, and maybe they're somewhat newer to you. Your reading this week had a number of articles helping to explain some of the details around these diets. Let's go over a quick overview of them right now. So we're going to start off with a ketogenic diet. The ketogenic diet is one that is intentionally a very, very low carbohydrate diet. So that means that we're looking at less than 50 grams per day. It gets its name because this particular diet, by being so low in carbohydrates, puts the body in a state of ketosis. Now, ketone bodies are fatty acids that have been converted in the liver into these ketone bodies. So when we're having a very low carbohydrate diet and we're ingesting more proteins and fats with no carbs to fuel the brain and some of our other systems, including our red blood cells, and you may remember carbohydrates were what we see as the primary fuel source in explosive type activities, in anaerobic type activities. If I haven't had much carbohydrates, then I have to find other ways to provide that energy. And the most concerning one, obviously, is the central nervous system and your red blood cells. So central nervous system in particular, the brain only uses carbs. It doesn't use fats or proteins. So they have to be converted by the liver into these ketone bodies. And then the brain, your neurons have to convert ketone bodies back into glucose. So you're really sort of relying on this backup secondary system. And that can become a bit of a problem. But it does actually have a number of benefits. So the ketogenic diet is one that is currently fairly popular. Some of the benefits that this particular method of eating encourages is it is going to help to reduce blood glucose levels. And it's doing that by controlling insulin release. So if we're having very, very low carbohydrate ingestion, we're not taking in very many carbohydrates, then insulin isn't released much. And we're not seeing changes in blood glucose levels. We're not seeing high blood glucose levels. And we're not seeing long term, we presume we're not going to be seeing the risk for type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance. This particular diet has actually been shown to be effective with both weight loss and fat loss. And in other ways of looking at benefits, the overall systemic inflammation within the body that can show up, especially with processed foods, ketogenic diets has been shown to really decrease a lot of these inflammatory markers, indicating that there isn't the level of inflammation in the body that there can be with a regular American diet. It also seems to be the case that ketones actually help to suppress a person's appetite. So combining that with the other benefits, or you can see how that parlays into the reduction of weight and even the reduction of fat. But it's not all great. There are some drawbacks to the ketogenic diet. Again, the brain operates only on glucose. So if we're having an incredibly low glucose consumption, then the brain's forced in the ketogenic diet to operate on the secondary fuel source. The second drawback that we've already mentioned a little bit is that those anaerobic, those explosive power type activities are ones that now are likely to be impacted and negatively impacted because you don't have that preferred fuel source to be able to power those explosive type activities. It also is true that this is a really new diet. This is a popular, but also a really new diet. So it can be really difficult to maintain because your body craves and knows that it needs carbs. So having an incredibly low carbohydrate diet will create some challenges and make it difficult to maintain that less than 50 grams a day of carbohydrate. It also is so new that there isn't much that we can look back to identify what the long-term effects of this particular diet are. So what's going to be the impact of a person being on the ketogenic diet long term? We're uncertain at this point because we don't have, it hasn't been around long enough to be able to effectively assess that. The next diet we're going to look at is actually a vegan diet or a plant-based diet. So in this particular form of diet restriction, the individual is limiting themselves just to plants. They're a vegan. A true vegan is not going to be consuming any animal products. So this means really that a person's likely to be really high in carbohydrate consumption and relatively low in both fat and protein consumption. Now, there's a lot of benefits to the vegan diet. It's one that is worth considering. Some of those benefits include that it focuses on the consumption of fruits and vegetables, which we have known is a really important component. By focusing on eating whole foods, we see a lot of nutritional benefits to that particular practice. You're going to also see that by having a vegan diet that eliminates all animal products, that you're going to be reducing the likelihood of consuming saturated fat, and cholesterol is something that's only found in animal products. So by not consuming animal proteins, you're going to be removing that dietary cholesterol. Both of those things, the increased saturated fat that's common with consuming animal proteins and the decrease of dietary cholesterol, are both associated with improving your health. So if you're consuming a lot of animal fats or proteins and you're consuming dietary cholesterol, then you're more likely to have negative health outcomes. There's not just nutritional aspects that can be included into this consideration, but looking beyond its nutritional impact, there can be ethical issues and even economic issues. So as you consider the eliminating the need for harvesting animal products, there's a lot of waste that goes into growing grains and shipping all of those grains to be able to feed animals, which then you harvest the animals and you have to go through the slaughtering of the animals and the shipping of all of that material. There is very realistically a much better use of our resources, better stewardship in a lot of ways, if we are looking at a vegan diet over a meat-based diet or a meat-including diet. We also know that a vegan diet has clearly been shown to lead to weight loss and reduce risk of heart disease. And we can explain that reduced risk of heart disease by going back to that content around dietary cholesterol and saturated fat that we talked about just a minute ago. So obviously it's been shown to have a lot of long-term positive impacts. And if you're really interested in this particular type of diet is one that's been historically followed in rural Asian populations. And as such, if you would like to find out more information about the impact of this kind of a diet with significant amount of research and large number of population within that research study, you could look into the China study, which looks at the impact of this diet over generations of consumers. Now, the vegan diet does have some drawbacks. It can be difficult to follow and maintain. So culturally, we're sort of surrounded by animal products. And as such, it can be a challenge to, if you're going out with friends, if you're going out to eat, if you're in settings where you are not the sole person controlling what the food choices are, it can be more challenging to follow the vegan diet. You really need to be eating whole foods for this to work. You can find memes and you can find other inferences to people suggesting or saying that they're on a vegan diet, but they're not eating healthy at all. If you are going to be following a vegan diet, you really need to be eating whole foods so that you get the nutritional content out of that food to be able to sustain your life. We need to make sure and be very thoughtful if you are pursuing a vegan diet to get all of the essential amino acids as well as your unsaturated fats. Amino acids being those building components of proteins, and our complete protein sources in the American culture traditionally come from animal products. But if we're not consuming those, there is one plant product, tofu, that is a complete protein source. But in large part, vegans need to make sure that they're looking at complementary food sources. So food sources that provide, that each of these multiple food sources provide some of the essential amino acids, and when combined together, they provide all of the essential amino acids. So there's also the challenge with some of our vitamins and minerals that we find more prevalent and find more easily digested from animal sources. For vegans, the ones they need to be most intentionally aware of include making sure you get enough iron and digestible iron. Vitamin B12 is also a vitamin complex that is readily available in animal products and relatively well digested or absorbed from animal products, but it's more challenging if you're on a vegan diet. So there are some places to be thoughtful about should you be considering adopting this particular diet. The next one we're going to look at is the paleo diet. You've probably heard of the paleo diet as well. In the paleo diet, the dietary strategy is to be sort of restricting and removing dairy products and restricting your legumes and grains. So it's really attempting to eliminate processed and high sugar foods. It's supposedly our evolutionary diet during the hunter-gatherer stage. So that's what the diet is attempting to mimic. It's got, like every diet, some benefits and some drawbacks, or at least every diet that we've looked at so far. Some of the benefits is it really does focus on the consumption of fruits and vegetables again, on whole foods, as a really valuable food source that's going to be very nutrient dense and much lower on the caloric intake. Following paleo diet can really lead to a decrease in blood triglycerides. So that's the amount of fatty acids floating around in the blood. And it can lead to decreases in abdominal fat. So we're not storing more fat either. It also has the ability to decrease insulin resistance. So as we are no longer consuming high sugar foods, we're no longer seeing that insulin spike and that insulin response. And our body learns to manage that system better and better with these natural sugars, whether they're including both complex and simple sugars. But by not having processed food, we're avoiding the added sugar. Now, what are some of the drawbacks? The one that I highlighted here is that it can contain really high amounts of animal fat or animal protein. And as such, that can also mean that we're significantly increasing our dietary cholesterol. So the associations of those with heart disease in particular, we've already mentioned in just the last couple of slides. The zone diet is the next diet that we're going to be looking at. In the zone diet, we look to have this strict ratio of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. This diet's actually been around for about 30 years, and it really focuses on high fiber carbs, trying to consume unsaturated fats, and including lean proteins. So there's a lot of really positive messages out of that particular aspect. For benefits of this particular diet, though, or to follow up with benefits, it's going to focus on the consumption of whole foods, which again, over and over, you're going to see as a really positive message out of many of these types of dietary strategies. It also has been shown to reduce blood glucose. It's going to help to relieve insulin resistance. And those markers of total body inflammation that typically come with highly processed foods are going to be reduced as we're removing much of that from the diet. The difficulties with this is it can be really complex and it can be pretty difficult to implement. This particular diet asks for this strict ratio of how many carbs versus fat versus protein you're having at each setting. So only some foods can be eaten or paired with others. And that really can take some planning, especially if you are in situations where you're not the one fully in control of what you're being served. So if you're going out to eat with a team, if you're going out to eat at a restaurant in general, whether it be with family or friends or as a team is traveling, all of those make it really challenging to sort of accurately follow the zone diet. It also can be restrictive on some fruits and vegetables based off of their carb content, based off of their sugar content. And some of those fruits or veggies may or may not be more accessible, but not approved, right? So you could have some fruits or some veggies that are in season. They could be lower expense and could be something that you prefer, but aren't authorized by the parameters of the zone diet. Another one that you may have heard much about, it's fairly popular right now, is the idea of intermittent fasting. Now, intermittent fasting isn't really a diet strategy, it's more of an eating strategy. But this is a dieting technique that sort of controls when you consume food. So it involves fasting for specific periods of time. And it has some benefits to this particular eating strategy as well, along with a drawback that we're going to highlight here too. But again, this is really focusing on when you eat, not on what you eat. So you can find multiple protocols suggested in popular media. There are 12-hour protocols, there's 14-hour protocols, there's 18-hour protocols. Probably the easiest of all of these that fit within the intermittent fasting strategy is just the idea of a 2-meal-a-day option. So one example of intermittent fasting would be someone who limits themselves to only eating at 10 a.m. and only eating at 6 p.m. Now, there are some benefits, like you said, and you can see on the screen, we're going to see changes to those blood glucose levels and in alignment with that, the insulin release. So our insulin resistance is going to be decreased with this particular eating strategy. We are going to see changes to inflammation markers. We are going to see changes to blood triglyceride levels and to total body cholesterol. The other thing that may be of value to you as you're thinking about different dieting techniques and which ones may be of use to you or may match with your preferences and your ethics better, this particular eating strategy really can be done in combination with any of the other diets that we've talked about as well. So since it is a focus on when you eat, not what you eat, this could be paired with some of the other eating or diet strategies we talked about. The drawbacks obviously are that it requires a really regimented schedule and it requires you to be planning. So if you are following even the most simple of the protocols, with the example being like, I'm going to eat at 10 and I'm going to eat at 6, and those are the only meals I'm going to have throughout the day, you need to be looking ahead in your schedule at what are you doing at 10? What are you doing at 6? Is food available? Do you have food that you've brought with you, etc., to make sure that you're following that eating schedule. So as we just sort of think over some of the main types of diets that we spotlighted here, most diets actually have been shown to be effective with improving health markers. But they can require a fairly strict adherence to the guidelines. So when we look at these individual things from a scientific literature standpoint, most of them, the focus of the research was on its impact on weight loss and which diets were most important to that. So what seemed to be a better indicator of whether weight loss was going to be taking place or not, the key determinant really was not which of the diets individuals participated in, but rather how strictly they followed it. So this regimented and strict adherence to a diet seems to be part of the greatest part of what makes them effective, at least from a weight loss standpoint. But what is actually a sustainable diet for your entire life? Would any of these be indicative of something that you feel like you could personally follow and adhere to for your whole life? And how can you implement a diet that allows you to live your life in a way that you want? Like, what's the best pairing between your lifestyle, your preferences, and what you want to be accomplishing with your diet? There's pros and there's cons for each of the diets that we've talked about. And I think it's just best for you to start thinking about, what do you see as being sustainable for you lifelong? Probably some really general recommendations that you can take from all of these, with the exception of intermittent fasting, since it was an eating strategy, is working to just reduce our processed foods, trying to increase the amount of whole foods that we eat, trying to increase in particular the amount of fruits and veggies that we consume. The idea of moderation, and especially with our sweets and our processed foods and our drinks, where we're consuming so many calories, that we just look to positively influence our diet by adopting moderation when consuming those things. And then over and over again, I think that you have seen that added sugar, when we've talked about diet, is really a big challenge to our health and a big problem within our communities right now. So if you look to adopt a dietary strategy that also is attentive to trying to limit the amount of added sugar, I think that those are some really basic recommendations that you can implement, but also you can experiment with other, maybe some of the diets that you saw here or some others in the future. But I would really encourage you to be thoughtful about, is it a diet that's going to be successful for me long term? I hope this has helped. I hope you have a great weekend and that you've had a good week. I will see you next time.